Good afternoon and welcome. I am Reverend Cindy Grimes with Center for Spiritual Living Ocala, and I am so glad that you could join us here this afternoon. If this is your first time, I want to tell you a little bit about who we are at the Center for Spiritual Living. And this is a list of the things that we value here at Center for Spiritual Living Ocala. And we at Center for Spiritual Living are part of a much larger movement. We are located in Ocala, Florida, but there are centers for spiritual living all over the United States and the rest of the world. And each one is independent and kind of has their own set of values. And this is what's important to us at CSL Ocala. Number one on our list is spiritual growth and practice. That is the reason we exist, and why we come together is to grow spiritually and to gain practices for living our best lives, our most meaningful and purposeful lives. We value love, and that's love for everybody, for all of humanity and our planet and all living things. We value appreciation. We value community and work to stay connected even during this time of social distancing. We value freedom of thought, freedom of expression. We value creativity and health and wholeness. We value generosity, and we value financial well-being. And our mission at the Center for Spiritual Living is to provide spiritual tools for personal and global transformation. Our purpose is to awaken humanity to its spiritual magnificence, and our vision is a world that works for everyone. And that means it works for me, and it works for you, and it works for our neighbors and people who look like us and don't look like us. All right, so to get us started off the right way, I'm going to invite our practitioners in. That is Donna Davis and Norma Anderson. Hi, ladies.
Hello, everyone.
How you doing?
I'm good. Me too.
You see they're on the road. Look at that dedication.
We're in the car.
Yes, they're in the car. Yes, not driving, right, Norma?
No. We're just sitting still. She grabbed me for my lunch break, so I could hop on.
Oh, I love you guys. Thank you so much. So I think I'll let you take it over and pray us in, or whatever else you want to say today.
Oh, okay.
So.
Be kind to yourself and each other. That's it.
And always take the moment to center.
Yes.
No matter
Yes.
what eye of the storm you may find yourself, be that eye.
Yeah.
Just
Awesome
center.
stuff.
And
You know,
speaking
I
of
love
centering,
it's your living proof right here, right? You can take a moment to center anytime, any place, right? Even if it means ducking into your car for a few minutes and breathing, or
bath.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do it a lot. Like I go to the bathroom. People probably think I have a horrible bladder thing. Because when it's like really, really bad, especially when I'm on the floor like that, I'll take a second in between and 2 seconds, not even a minute, and I'll just pop in there, close the door, lock everything out, and just breathe just for 30 seconds and then pop back out and run back on the floor. And that's how I do it.
Yeah.
So,
Good.
and it works
Awesome.
for me.
Terrific. Well, I'm going to pull myself out here, and then you go ahead and pray us in, and I will talk about our guest.
Okay. All
All
right.
right.
Oh, hi, everybody. Take a breath with me. I'm going to try my best not to shake this tablet. So, we're just going to go ahead and take a few deep breaths in and out. And it's been shown that to calm fight or flight, all you have to do is take more in the out breath than you do in the in breath. So I'm going to just take a moment to count in 1, 2, 3, 4, holding, and breathe out to 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I recognize the allness of the One. God is everywhere present. It moves in and through and around all things. It is in this very space that I sit. It is in the space outside of this car that I sit in. It is in the trees, it's in the birds, it's in the ants on the ground. every place that I can think of or see or hear, God is there. So as I sit in this space that is a holy space, no matter where I am, I can always drop into that recognition of the one. I can also drop into the fact that I am a part of life itself. Life itself is living and breathing my body. I am a testament of life, creation, sitting in this very spot. Since it's true for me, I know it's true for every other person that ever existed and will ever shall exist. We are all a part of this oneness. It's from that space of oneness that I speak my word now, knowing that the right things that need to be heard is said, and that the heart is open to this divine conversation between Reverend Cindy and Leaf today. And whatever bonds that exist can be broken in this moment. There is a relaxation and a letting go of the past that can occur. We are moving forward, upwards, always as human race. I am grateful for my brothers and sisters on this journey with me. I'm grateful for those who recognize themselves as divine, and for those who just don't know yet. We hold that space for them. I'm grateful for this very moment and for this next breath. And I release all these thoughts into the law, this law that's governed by divine unconditional love. And so it is.
So it is.
And so it is. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I really do appreciate you that you ladies would just, drop what you're doing in the middle of this crazy day and to drop into that prayer for us and get us started out right.
But Cindy, that's the thing. It's you have to make the time for it. We can't
Hmm.
be beings doings all the time. We have to be a being from time to time. And I've always said that unless somebody is crashing or coding, and that's what a team is for, right? Unless somebody's crashing or coding, it is not a life or death situation.
Hmm.
Take a second, 10 seconds even, and take a few deep breaths can make a world of difference in your life for stress control. And it'll do wonders for your heart and lungs and all of that stuff. Take it from me. I take care of cardiac patients, and those deep breaths will help with stress relief. And next thing you know, your heart will thank you.
Mm. Thank you, my dear.
You're welcome.
And thank you, Norma.
You're
We'll
welcome.
catch up with you ladies later.
All
All
right.
righty.
Enjoy the rest of your shift today.
I will, because I'll be listening.
Terrific.
You'll be in my pocket.
And you see, we changed the background again.
I saw that. Okay. Moving and flowing, honey. Moving and flowing.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Love you, ladies.
Love you
Love you
too.
too.
All right. We'll see you. All right, terrific. So I want to tell you a little bit about our guest today is Leaf Seligman. She is an author. She is a college professor. She is an ordained minister, and she's a fellow peace builder. Leaf and I met through the River Phoenix Center for Peace Building at an immersion experience and realized that we were kindred spirits. And I think since then, we've done at least one other workshop together. There may be more, but I was really excited to have her come and have this chat with us today on this idea of grief and grieving. And well, I'm just going to bring Leaf into the conversation right here, right now. Hello, Leaf.
Hello, Cindy. Hello, everyone listening. And thank you so much, Donna, for that beautiful invocation and breathing and prayer, and Norma for your support in the car. That was lovely. Lovely way to.
Yeah, isn't that awesome?
Yes, totally.
It's really a great community, and I'm so glad that you could join us from New Hampshire.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's been one of the great blessings of COVID. A hidden thing was that we could connect with people from all over the place now.
Yeah, it's great.
We have people watching from all over, and yeah, people can join us from any place and watch anytime. And you and I can sit, which we couldn't do it
That's
before,
right.
not without spending a lot of money anyway.
That's right.
Yes, yes. So I want for the congregation or whoever is watching to know a little bit about who you are. So tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, let's see. I was born and raised in the South, Nashville, Tennessee. Well, I grew up in Brentwood, but before it was filled with country music stars. When I grew up, it was filled with cows and rock orange trees. And so I grew up in what I like to say is sort of the edge of the beginning of the civil rights movement, but really I was totally where I lived. It was still a lot of Jim Crow, sad to say. So that I bring that up because it feels like it really shaped my life. And as our conversation unfolds and we think about grief, I think about the ways in which our bodies carry the grief of the context that we are born into, and just thinking about being raised in a time and a place and a space where so much human potential was not honored and recognized. I think that there's a way that there's a kind of particles of grief that come into the body without us ever knowing it. Because I think about that. I think about all the brilliant human beings around me, people of color who just, in the world that I grew up in were not honored and treated with due respect and regard. And so anyway, that was certainly formative. I grew up in a Reformed Jewish household in a city where my first cousins were all conservative Jewish people. So that meant that I was the kind of outlier because we celebrated Christmas and we ate bacon. So I was an outlier, but I was still told when I was 9 years old that I killed Christ. So I was kind of like clearly too Jewish for the Protestant kids and never felt quite Jewish enough with my cousins, although they were lovely. They never say anything. But I was always worried if they came over to our house in December, they would go, "What? What is that tree with all the lights and ornaments on it?" I'd be busted. So anyway, that's a little bit about kind of where I grew up and what shaped me. And I've been a writer since I was a kid, because I wrote to understand what was incomprehensible to me. It was my way of figuring out why people did what they did when I couldn't understand it. So that sort of shaped me as a lifelong writer. And when I was a little kid, I really fancied myself wanting to be Martin Luther King Jr., who was large in my life and imagination. And so I used to stand out on the hillside where I lived and pretend I was preaching as if I were Dr. King. So his voice, and also the voice of all the sort of folks. It's funny. I don't know that I ever went to an actual tent revival, but I feel like I have them in my body and have wanted to, I've talked about having an inner tent revivalist for years, 20, 30 years. And then I finally decided it's not inner. I just am a tent revivalist, and I am the tent wherever I go. Hopefully I create a space of welcome for people in the spirit to come and commingle. So that's in my head, all those wonderful tent revival voices that I must have heard in the South coming out of loudspeakers. And so it's a lovely mix, so it's you asked me before we sort of came on camera if I had a kind of denominational affiliation or a particular tradition. And for me, it's really an amalgam of all of that. You can see the trees in the background in this beautiful painting, and they're a huge part of my sense of spirit and God, in the trees. And then I got the kind of Pentecostal fervor and the power of Martin Luther King and the cadence of the Black church preachers and the shofar sounding and the Hebrew prayers of my childhood. So all of it's all in there.
Wow, I didn't know that. I just love that story. So you're a Reformed Jew in the Deep South that became an ordained minister. Like, that's just so cool.
I always say that it's kind of nice, I met a rabbi once when I was in divinity school, and I was a little sheepish. I was officiating some friends' same-sex marriage before that was legal, but it was, spiritually important to them to have a union. And I saw this rabbi was there, and I think he was the one who actually maybe signed a certificate or something. But and I was embarrassed because I thought he was going to call me out. And he said the loveliest thing. He said, "No, I understand. You are meant to be a light among the nations." And I always joked that if God had wanted me to be a rabbi, God would have endowed me with better skills to get through biblical Hebrew in divinity school. Because I was never going to get good enough in Hebrew to do anything meaningful with it. So I took that as a sign that, no, I wasn't supposed to be a rabbi. just supposed to be a good person in the world. And
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I grew up in a tradition where I think when I was a kid, I wanted to be a nun because that was a tradition that I came up in, and then found, the priests and thought, well, geez, I want to be a priest. I don't want to be a nun. But that was not open to me, and like you, feeling like I never quite fit in wherever I was. I wasn't enough this and I wasn't enough that, and just feeling a little bit misfit. Yeah, but I think that experience of not fitting in is also something that in some ways deepens compassion, maybe, right? For people who are a little bit different, or for those moments when we all feel like, isolated or alone or not enough or some other way not fitting.
absolutely right. And you mentioned, I mean, that's kind of how the last book I wrote came about, because I identified with all the world's, in quotes, misfits and the people who don't fit in anywhere. And I think that's what I came to learn, is that probably so many of us feel that, even the ones that you or I, we might look and say, oh, so-and-so, now that person ticks all the boxes. And probably if we sat down with that person might, if she or he, they felt safe, would say, I don't feel that way. Here's the place where I feel like I don't fit. And I think that's a wonderful thing to remember, that we're related in that way. We're not the same, but we're related. We're related in our, and that ideally, that for me, the great gift in my life, the greatest gift in my life is filled with gifts, but the greatest gift of all is that feeling inside of enoughness, that now I know I am enough. I am enough. What I do is enough, and I am enough. And I think that's a really lovely place to get to for any of us, to feel like, yes, we are enough.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's, well, for me, and I'm thinking you probably feel the same way, that's part of my role as a minister, is to live in my enoughness, right?
Mm-hmm.
To understand that for myself and be able to model it, but also to help other people come into their enoughness,
Mm-hmm.
realization that they are perfect just the way they are, with all their, what other people might perceive or what they may perceive themselves as imperfections, that it's just part of what makes us human and makes us lovable and part of this crazy diversity of life. We can't all be the same. We're not supposed to be.
No.
Yeah. And that I'd love for you to expand some more about the book, because I really loved it. And of course I read it after meeting you, found out that, you were an author, and I thought, well, I've got to read this. And so I actually listened to the audio, and it was beautiful. It was you reading it,
Mm-hmm.
which was great. So I got another sense, another layer of Leaf and who you are and what you're about. And it was very moving, very, very moving.
Thanks.
Yeah, of the carnival folks. And
Yeah.
Well,
and the characters are really dear to me. I mean, they lived in me for so long. I wrote most of the stories I wrote a long time ago, and then I finished the book a couple of years ago, I guess, and wrote the last story, which really is the story that sort of brings the other stories sort of into a kind of sense of, I think, resolution and redemption. I mean, for me, the subtitle of the book, the title of the book is From the Midway, and the subtitle is unfolding stories of redemption and belonging. And yes, you can see people peering under the carnival tent. Yeah, I love that cover. I have to say, I'm enamored with that cover. But I think that the reason I use the word unfolding is I think all of our stories are continuing to unfold. They're not completed, they're not done, and not just the stories in the book, but all of our stories. And that redemption, which I define as freedom from detriment, or freedom from harm, really simple. Freedom from the harm we cause, and freedom from the harm we experience. And for me, the way we get that freedom is not by thinking that any of us will escape harm in our lives, because we won't, but it's knowing that we can continue to grow and to inhabit the harm in a way that doesn't completely derail us, that we can experience it, that we can learn from it, that we can grow from it, we can strengthen ourselves from it, and we can carry on. That feels really important. So yeah, the characters are important because they're people who are mostly displayed as oddities in a carnival tent 100 years ago, and they had very difficult lives. And I think the world looked at them mostly, and literally looked at them, paid to look at them because of their oddness, and never saw who they were, their humanity. And I think a lot of us do. We just referenced that. A lot of us feel that way, that, what people might notice about us is not our essential selves. And that one of the great gifts we can give each other is to acknowledge. I love that beautiful definition. Rachel Naomi Remen, the wonderful writer and teacher and healer, physician, she has that beautiful definition of blessing, where she says, a blessing is not something we bestow upon one another. It's a state or quality of relationship in which we notice and acknowledge each other's true nature and worth, and provide a refuge from all that is not genuine. And I think that's, I hope, what the book does. Is, for me as the author, it's my acknowledgement of, I see the humanity and the wholeness of these individuals. And in doing so, hopefully I see the wholeness and humanity in every being that I encounter. And that's ours to do. That we can have not a coin in our pocket, not a loaf of bread in the larder, and we can still offer each other acknowledgement.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, beautiful. Beautiful. You're so eloquent.
Well, words is my business.
Yes. Yeah. You're in the right business for sure. So, we came together to do a workshop on grief.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I think the book actually speaks a lot to that idea of grieving, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of again, that idea of not fitting in, of not being enough.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I just want to talk about that, the value of grief.
Right.
It's not a popular topic,
No, it's not a popular topic, but and I think we both agreed it's really essential. And what I would say about the book, and what I noticed, I was just having a conversation with a dear friend a little bit before this call and this worship time, and I was saying that I spent so much of my own life disembodied, and that brings up quite a lot of grief in my body to acknowledge that. And that now in the sort of what I call the last third of my life, I'm really focused on embodiment, really tuning into what's happening in my body. Because for so many years, I just was like, from here up, I don't know what's this appendage down here. I'm ignoring it. And I think the characters, without me realizing it, when I started writing those stories in the mid 1990s, I thought of myself. I had my own reasons. I felt kind of freakish in my body, and my own history of feeling sort of like I was in the wrong body, born into the wrong body, and the wrong gender for a while, and just not being embodied. And the characters, it's their bodies where they are, that's sort of their point of alienation. They're on display because their bodies don't match our expectations or elicit our worst fears. Oh God, what if I were like that? And there's a real grief, I think, for most of us. And I listened to this beautiful poem today. Shout out to the podcast Poetry Unbound, which is part of On Being's suite of podcasts. And this Irish poet, Padraig O'Tuama, does this beautiful podcast where he reads poems and it sort of, I don't want to say explains, but he engages with them. And one of the poems I was listening to this morning had to do with, it was actually called, I don't want to misstate it, but I think it was called a New Religion. And it really was about a religion that would honor our embodiment. And so I feel like part of the grief of the book was, for me, this kind of ode or elegy to a life of disembodiment. Because I felt like, oh, my body isn't what society wants or expects or blah, blah, blah. And so I will divorce myself from it. And I feel a little bit like Cain, who was left to wander. Cain is actually my favorite character in the Bible. And which might strike some people as an odd choice, since most people go, oh, Cain, that's the guy who slew his brother Abel. And I go, Cain was actually a character who was a gardener and a grower of vegetables and fruits, I think. And he offers God his most beautiful, succulent plant offerings. And God says, nah, I want a fatted lamb. And the thing is, that's not who Cain is. He's not a shepherd. He can't be what he can't be. He can't offer what he isn't. And so I noticed in this, for me, the way that story, and I bring it up because I think For me, it speaks to such a deep and primal grief, which is why the story has so much power, at least for me, is that there's this kind of sense, I imagine Cain feeling that his God rejects him fundamentally for who he is. Not just like, hey, you didn't like my basket of fruits, but like, God, you don't appreciate who I am and my gifts and what I have to offer. And you prefer that of my brother and what he does, which I don't do. And that was so unbearable for Cain that, yes, he slays Abel, which is not good. None of us support that. And it's Cain who wanders. God never actually says, hey, Cain, I'm going to have nothing to do with you. In fact, God says, I will mark you so that I will know where you are and that no one else will kill you or harm you. And Cain is the one who removes himself. And I think about my characters and how some of them are removed from their families, but some of them leave their families to join the carnival, to join the oddities pavilion, because somehow they feel separated from the divine. Like, I don't belong. I'm somehow not worthy. And I think that's the deepest grief a body can hold, is that I don't belong. And it is your beautiful opening in invocation of oneness. What does it mean if we think we don't belong to the oneness?
Right. That's the deeper, the first betrayal is the societal expectation that we be this, that we have to look a certain way, that we have to be of a certain class, that we have to have a certain amount of money or whatever to be acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
The second betrayal, the deeper betrayal, is when we believe it.
Bingo. Beautifully said.
Right? Because we all come into this, it's been my theme for the year, the BS, right? That we come into, belief systems, right? The belief systems that we have. And we can't help what we come into. I mean, you were born into the life and the environment that you were born into. I was born into a very different one, right? But and we don't have control over that, but we do have control over what we do with it and where we go from there. And I think so much of life is number one, identifying all of that BS, and then determining what's true for us. What makes my heart sing? What brings me joy? It may not be what it is for everybody else. But that's part of the mystery and joy and fun and adventure of living, I think.
Right. And I think you and maybe Donna in her lovely prayer alluded to the, or maybe it was in the conversation. Well, no, it's just at the end when she mentioned if there's a code in the hospital, it's critical, life and death, that then the team responds. And that struck me because I think one of the things that you and I both, I think, would share is that we, part of what allows me to dismantle a belief system that's harmful and not true is that there are other people, again, who will acknowledge that with me. Because it's very hard, especially when we're young, when we're little beings, when we're children, and we know in our bodies, there's something that, like, I knew in my body as a really quite a young child, that the segregation I saw around me and the utter disregard and the subjugation of people of color was wrong. Like, I felt it in my little body. And I'm very lucky I grew up with parents who absolutely acknowledged that and worked hard in their own ways, to be anti-racist people. But I remember feeling that. But in the school I went to, which was a private school, and it was a white school, white Protestant school. We were the first Jewish family, and Catholic kids were not regarded much better than the Jewish kids, and we weren't regarded very well. So, in that world, there were a lot of people who validated the BS that I was, the sort of dominant BS of like, hey, there's nothing wrong with the fact that all the kids are white and that all the teachers are Mr. and Mrs. or Miss, and because they're all white adults and we speak with respect. And the only people of color in my school were the two men who were the custodians, who are only ever referred to as Willie and Bill. And I remember being 6 years old in first grade and saying to my mom and dad, I don't understand. Why is everybody, all the adults are Mr. or Mrs. or Miss. We had some unmarried teachers, but I said, I don't understand. Willie and Bill aren't Mr. They don't have last names, and what's wrong? They're grown-ups. I was a kid. When we stood, anytime an adult walked in our classroom, you stood out of respect. Now, the custodians often wouldn't walk in a classroom, but say they did need to come in and change a light bulb, nobody would stand. And then as a little kid in my body, I knew that's BS. But the teachers and the adults in my school would have said, "Oh, no, you don't understand." And so I just want to lift up. I think that's a piece of the grief, is that so many of us did know in our bodies and in our beings, and do know that there's a belief system that is inherently not true.
Right.
And it's super hard to push against that when everyone around us supports it. It's very hard. I mean, I think that's why you're in a center for spiritual living, right? It's a center. You're not going in alone.
Right.
You know?
Absolutely. Oh, so good. So good. And it speaks to our topic, right? The grief, the deep, deep pain, and how challenged we are now with COVID because of physical distancing. We call it social distancing. It shouldn't be social distancing.
Right.
It's physical distancing. But the fact is that we can't grieve in the ways that we have been accustomed to grieving, of people coming together, of being able to be by somebody's bedside as they're transitioning. I mean, how many people have been denied that? And so there's all of this pain and suffering and grief that's just like right here. And like, what do we do with it? How do we manage it besides just trying to get rid of it because it doesn't feel good?
Well, right. Yeah. Just in what you said, the layers of grief of, one, that people we love and ourselves, I mean, you were ill, people get sick, and then you can't accompany them. You can't visit in the hospital, or when people are even dying, the fact that family members couldn't be in the room with their loved ones and they're passing. And I just this weekend, actually today, I was supposed to visit a friend, and she had to text and say, "I'm so sorry, but my partner's mother just passed." And how utterly horrible that they can't, there's not going to be a funeral or a service. They can't gather as a family because of COVID, because there are spikes and where we're living in a rural area. And so there's that, like you said, there's all that layered onto just the raw grief of people are ill, people are dying, we can't be together. And then it's collective, right? Because you go, wow, 224,000 people have died, 7 million or 8 million in our country have been ill. So it seems like everybody knows someone who's been affected quite directly.
Right.
And so then it's not even like you can kind of go, oh, well, I'll go over here and no one's been affected and I will get a little relief from the grief. It's like everyone is feeling the grief.
Yeah. And it's not just the COVID. I mean, added to that, the racial unrest and as we were saying, an election that's coming up, and we know someone's going to win, someone's going to lose. And there are going to be a lot of grieving people in this country.
Yes, there are.
One side or the other. So does it help us to know that going into it? Like, can we prepare ourselves? How do we do that? How do we honor our own grief? There's so many questions. But one thing I want to say going into that conversation is that grief is normal and a part of our human experience, and not something that you can just brush away without having some kind of consequence, right?
I can testify to that.
Yes.
Yeah. Actually, I got up this morning, Cindy, and I realized that it's 20 years ago. I won't say to the day, but certainly to the month, because it was October of the year 2000 that I was in my second year of divinity school, and a very dear friend of mine who's a poet and a spiritual director said to me, "Leaf, I just get the feeling that you have some really deep grief work to do. And until you do it, you will not be able to minister well to anyone." And, I listened to her and I heard her, and I didn't think she was wrong, Cindy, but I couldn't figure out what was the deep grief work. I didn't sit still long enough to really hear what it was. So I just motored on. And I finished divinity school, and I finished my internship, and I got called to a church, and blah, blah, blah. And I didn't do that work until really last year. And I'm here to tell you that I think she was right. I mean, I don't think it means I didn't minister well to anyone, but I think what it means is that the grief work that I did not do became someone else's work. I made messes. It was, I think that's what I want to say to folks about, grief, is that grief is messy. Yeah. And I made a big mess in my life early on in the formation of my sort of ministerial career, because I didn't heed the fact that she was right. I had a lot of deep, deep grief from childhood that I hadn't attended to. And because I was functioning really well, as so many of us do, right? We function, we get up, we go to work. I went to school, I made good marks, blah, blah, blah. I wrote good papers. And so I thought, I'm great, I'm fine. And I realized that deep inner grief wanted attending to. And I wouldn't have had to surrender my life to it at all. I just would have had to be present with it and do some work with it and resolve it. And I didn't. And I think that then, because of that, what I've learned about grief is if you don't attend to it, it's sort of like a tick. It stays with you. Ticks like cling, man. They get on you and they do not let go. And I feel like once we, as you said, as we know going into this election, there will be grief on the other side of it. And grief, as you mentioned, within families. So you might be elated at the outcome, but your relatives may not. And then there's a grief there because the holidays are, even if we can't gather, we might Zoom on a holiday. And, there's that sort of backdrop of, gee, I'm elated at the outcome, but my parents or my spouse or my whoever is not.
Right.
Or vice versa. I'm bereft at the outcome. I'm so worried. And, my relatives, my loved ones are over there cheering. And there's a grief to that disconnect. And so for me, it's really important to acknowledge that, the sort of what I call the forethought of grief, to go, yes, there's going to be some pain. So how do we meet each other with tenderness and just acknowledge that one of my favorite things actually from the tradition that I did grow up in, which is the Jewish tradition, when there's a death, a person, if there's a death in the family, the person usually wears a piece of rent, torn black ribbon or cloth on the lapel for 30 days. And it's just a signal that says, I am tender with grief. And I feel like if we could all wear that torn black cloth or ribbon on our lapels and just recognize that. And people, in a Jewish community, you wouldn't have to say, oh, it was my mother, it was my father, it was my brother. You would just go, Cindy's wearing that. And then it would just be a moment of pause. And I feel like if we can do that with each other, to say, can I just pause and be tender? Start with that. Because I feel like that's what we do with each other when we know there's grief. Even if we are upset ourselves, if we're frustrated, if we're angry, generally I've noticed, and I'm sure you have as a clergy person too, at a wake or a memorial service, at calling hours, at the hospital or hospice bed, there's a tenderness usually. People are gentle.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's what's called on at this time. I understand the importance of righteous indignation about systemic racism and white supremacy for sure. And I still believe more than ever, tenderness.
Yeah. And people are carrying burdens we have no idea about.
Right.
Right. Right. So there's a video out there, where people have the thought bubbles.
Yeah.
Imagine if you could see the thought bubbles over everybody's head. Yeah, of what their challenges are, and just kind of assume people are going through stuff. So there's value in anticipatory grief, I believe, right? Yeah. I was a hospice social worker, and I years ago, it was one of my first jobs as like an adult, as a grown-up person. And it was really formative for me, to be with people who are at the end of their lives and start thinking about, okay, what's really important here? And the gift in the realization that, our time is limited, right? And that people could say, okay, wow, I've got a diagnosis, or my loved one has a diagnosis, and I know that we have just months to make things right, to make amends, to repair our relationship, or whatever we need to do, right? Your priorities come into place very quickly. And so I think that's an opportunity that we have going into this time, and where we are right now with COVID is, let's stop and pause. Wherever we are, as busy as we are, even like Donna and Norma, right, in the parking lot of the hospital, just take a moment to pause and think and reflect.
Yeah, and for me, what grief, from the value for me of sinking into it. And like I notice now, when grief comes up, I'll just say it in a conversation. I'll just say, wow, I'm feeling this wave of grief come up in my body. And just by saying it, it sort of allows the grief just to move through, just to flow through. And then it flows through. It doesn't stay stuck. And I want to say that for me, what I've learned about grief and it's sort of conjoined twin disappointment is that what I grieve is what I've had or what I haven't had, but I could imagine. And so that's really instructive for me, because in the grief, I can feel the both and. I can absolutely feel the grief and I have felt like everyone else on the planet, just grief so bad. I thought, I don't even care if I live another day. This is so painful. I just really don't care. It's so painful. And there are moments though in that grief when it subsides enough to go, I'm feeling this grief because I had love and I lost it. Or I loved this person fiercely and this person is no longer alive. Right. Or I had this, whatever it might be for someone. I had a job or a career that I loved, and as many people have lost work that they may not recover after this pandemic, or the opportunity to be a provider for the family, whatever. There's so much loss. And then the people who say, I have lost the opportunity again. I want to be mindful of bringing my full range of gifts and talents to a society that does not accept or see them because of the color of my skin or the way, or by the social construction of race or gender or whatever else. And I think even when it's not been allowed, the person oneself can go, I know my personhood. I know my gifts. I know what I could have shown in the world. I know the illumination I could offer, and that I've not been able to is a grief. And I feel like knowing that, or having experienced the love that is lost, or the opportunity that is now lost, or that at least I can take a moment to say, but I had that, or I at least had the capacity to imagine that. And not everyone does. So I want to be super grateful that grief on its sort of flip side, for me, occasions a kind of gratitude and sometimes a kind of liberation on the other side of the grief too. To go, okay, so that's what that grief was about. And if I can resolve it, it doesn't have to haunt every other situation I have, where it's so easy. When I met you, like last year, when I was down at the wonderful immersion training, and I was feeling some real grief about a relationship that was changing. And I think at the time I wasn't aware how much it kicked up earlier griefs from my childhood. And once I could recognize that, then I could sort of say, I think a lot of this is quite old. Let me go back and deal with the child in me and comfort that person. And then the contemporary grief didn't have to be quite so intense. And so I think maybe we can even do that as we move into the election, the continuing COVID-16, 19, as people call it.
Right.
That we can say there are layers and layers and layers of grief. And if I can unpack them and give them each their due, then maybe they won't be quite so overwhelming, like a big sticky ball of spaghetti that's, that big pasta. Yeah.
Right. And then you can attend to other people's grief, because it doesn't get mixed up then with your own.
Right.
To be able to be present with people because they haven't, pushing your buttons and spinning you back into your own stuff. So,
yeah, I bet you found that, right? As a hospice chaplain, if you didn't do your work, it would be so easy, right, for other people's grief to kind of occasion yours. Then you forget, wait a minute, I'm in the room to be with you, to come you in your passage, right?
Exactly. Yes. Wow. So, so let's wrap it up because we're short on time. What would we want to say for people? My summary would be, number one, allow yourself to feel it. Know that it's normal and it's natural. And the quote, I don't know who to attribute it to, but that grief is the price we pay for loving.
Right.
As grief is part of that. And if we don't allow ourselves to feel it, then we don't get to feel the full scope of our joy either.
Right. Valerie Kaur, that's who said that grief is the price of love.
Love. I love that.
Yeah.
So, and your statement about just being tender with others and just assuming that everybody is going through something.
Right. Everybody is. Yeah. And for me, I guess the last thing I would say about grief is that for me, there can be a profound intimacy in grief. Because if I am dropped down and feel my grief and remember how it feels, it really allows me to be a lot more empathetic and imagine how your grief might feel. Even if I can't know, I can kind of empathetically connect. And then I think you and I have talked about this, and maybe when we did the webinar on grief, right? That's something I've experienced when I've been able as a pastor to be present, or as a friend to be present, or even almost as a pastor. Sometimes it was as a stranger, like as an on-call chaplain. I didn't have a relationship with people, but they would call me to the hospital in the last moments of a loved one's life, and to be invited into the intimacy of that. It was such a deep human connection. It was wordless often. And so I want to lift up that as we face the grief together, one thing we might do, as you said, is if we can just be still, quiet, take the breaths Donna invited us to take, we might feel a sense of deep connection with the very people we don't agree with politically. We might connect belly to belly on the level of grief,
Gosh, you're so right. You're so right. I just got a little epiphany. I think that experience as a hospice social worker in my early 20s was so formative for me, because I learned how to make those relationships, really intimate relationships with people, because we were there in their grief, right? You get an opportunity to really cut to the core of what it is to be a human being and what's important and how to connect with people. So it really is quite an opportunity, if we can look at it that way, for our own healing and to facilitate healing for others, and going in as we keep evolving up and growing spiritually.
Yes. So I think, welcoming grief, like Rumi's beautiful poem about, that we're a guest house and you welcome every feeling, even what guts you, because it's a guide from beyond. And I think grief can be that. I think grief can be divine. Grief can be sacred, and clearly we all experience it. So it's this lovely way. I think that it's an incarnational way. Back to what we're talking about with bodies. Grief is you feel grief in your body.
Yeah.
That's where it lives. Because when we're disembodied, when we're passed on, whatever our spiritual beliefs about a different realm or different life, what we know is in this one is where we feel grief, in this right here. And I feel like, it's this beautiful incarnational way to know that I am part of the sacred, with all the other beings, even the animals. The animals, I think they grieve too.
Yeah. Oh, so beautiful, Leaf.
Thanks so much for inviting me into your lovely spiritual community.
Thank you for sharing your wisdom and your beautiful tenderness, and I just love you. Thank you so much. Are you going to be able to join us?
Sure, you'll have to. I go to Facebook or something, right?
Yeah, we'll put the link in there, and you can join us in Zoom afterward, for anybody who might want to join us and have a conversation and just go a little bit deeper, or talk about your book or anything else. And I just thank you so much. I think I'm going to put your book up again one more time for people to see that, so they can go to your website and check out From the Midway. It's available as an audiobook and as a print copy, and you can go to her website here, Leaf Seligman. Let me share my screen, because I think your website is just really lovely. Let's see if I can do that. Chrome tab. Here we go. Leaf Seligman. Are you seeing your picture? Is that what we're seeing?
No, just the book, but that's fine.
Just the book? Okay, let me see. Let me see if I can.
I think if people go to my website,
I have to take the book out.
I love that little picture.
Did I do it? There we go.
There you go.
Yeah, I just love that. Love that picture of you. And then there's just some beautiful quotes here.
Thanks.
Love it.
That was consecration at Temple. But I love it, because I think that, if anybody ever asked for an ordination picture, I think that's what I would give them. That's when I feel like I was probably really ordained, right there.
Your picture right there? Yeah. I see the joy. That's awesome. All right, let me bring us back here.
All right. Well, thank you so much, and I will join you in the social time.
Terrific. We'll see you on Zoom. See you later. Oh, that was just beautiful. Well, I want to, gosh, thank you so much, Talif, for that really inspired conversation. Yeah. So what we're going to do now is take some time to share our gifts and our tithes. The Center for Spiritual Living exists and is able to do what we do because of the gracious donations of time, talent, and treasure of the folks that are affiliated and who believe in our mission and our vision. And so I just invite you. Let's see, we've got a way for folks to donate who may be interested in doing that. And we've made it really simple for people. You can do what we call text to tithe. So you would call that phone number, not call the number, but text the number, and then put in the amount of money that you would want to donate to the center. And you just put in your 20 or 200 or whatever the number happens to be, and you text it, and it will go right from your account to ours, which is beautiful. Or you can donate via PayPal on our website at cslocala.org/donate. And so we greatly appreciate anything that you can share with the center. And I will do our affirmation. It is the nature of life to give of itself, as it is the tree's nature to bear fruit and the flower's nature to bloom. It is my nature to share the gifts of my time, talent, and treasure. I participate in the divine flow of life, giving generously and receiving abundantly. I am blessed and I am a blessing, and I am so very grateful. And I invite you to make that your affirmation as you go through in your life. Know that whatever it is that you want to receive in your life, whether it's, if it's love that you are needing, then give love and you get the ball rolling and you get it started and it comes back to you. What we put out comes back. So if it's money that you're in need of, then plant some seed money. And whether you plant it with the Center for Spiritual Living or someplace else, I hope you're giving it to the center, but the important thing is that you give somewhere, that you share your talent, that you share your gifts and your tithes, so that you can keep that ball in motion. And let's see what else I want to tell you about. We have, next week is going to be a little bit different. Let me take this off here. Yes, next week we will be meeting, instead of at our usual time of 3 o'clock, we're going to be meeting at 4 o'clock, and we're going to be doing a special prayer for our country and blessing the candidates as we go into the election. And so be on the lookout on our Facebook page. We'll have all the pertinent information. You'll be signing in through Center for Spiritual Living Ocala, but we will be joining with other communities from around the country, some folks on the West Coast and out in Colorado, and we will be doing a ritual and little prayer ceremony together. So I invite you to join us for that. And again, it's going to be at 4 o'clock instead of the usual 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And so I think that's about it. Let's see, I've got some comments here. Looks good. That's all the information for joining us on the Zoom call later on. And I believe that's about it. So I will close this out with our prayer for protection, which comes from our brothers and sisters in the unity tradition. And it is: the light of God surrounds us, the love of God enfolds us, the power of God protects us, and the presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is, and all is well. The place you're standing on is holy ground. And I invite you to take that in and to breathe that and know it and go out there and shine your light in this world. So I hope you have a wonderful week. I look forward to seeing you next week and hope that you and some friends maybe will join us as we gather in prayer for our country. And so hope you all have a great week. Love and blessings.